casual conversation, Dan. We've had some great conversations by the fireside, so we call it the Fireside Chat. It's our version of it in between two ferns. But really happy and grateful just to be able to have collaborated work, learn from Dan, who's been an advisor to us in a lot of different ways, especially within the learning and development group. And so really excited to talk with you, Dan, about just L&D as an area and as a facet, just notions of creativity and what's happening in terms of trends, and a bit about your own story there. We'll talk for a little bit and go through some of the questions we talked about earlier, then open it up for questions. But again, meant to be more of a casual conversation. Feel free to go off on tangents if you'd like.
All right, well, that's good.
We'll see. We'll see where the journey and path takes us down. But the first one, would love to get a better understanding of your role at Banana Republic, and maybe a little bit about the journey or some of the key inflection points that got you to where you are now.
Yeah. Well, it started a long time ago. No. My current role at Banana Republic is in what we call talent management, which is a little bit of a fancy way of saying learning and development. But it's evolved a little bit where beyond just kind of traditional education and training to really looking a little more holistically at our talent and how we're kind of planning that for all phases. And so I focus primarily on our headquarters folks, who are all now in our San Francisco headquarters office. Yeah, just I guess a little bit bigger of getting to this point. It's not really the type of career. I think most people say, like, I want to be in talent management when I grow up, or L&D, although I did early on think, maybe I want to be a teacher, political science or English. But then kind of having the, negative sticker shock of, unfortunately, wow, teachers don't get paid that much. So I think I kind of found my way into this as a nice compromise, I feel like, where it is having the opportunity to be in the corporate world. I've had the opportunity to work with some great brands and exciting companies, but really in a role that is, I think, education focused. So I feel like the work that I do does help the organization, the company, but also actually help people, both in their professional lives and personal lives. So a little bit, as a lot of things in life, I kind of stumbled my way into, but it's been probably 15 years now, one way or the other, working in this type of profession, and I've really, really enjoyed it.
So that interest in political science and literature and English, has that creativity been something you've been able to bring to the role? And what are some great examples of maybe kind of creative ways you've tackled those challenges at some place like Banana Republic or some of the other places that you've been? Yeah, well,
I think a great kind of talent management or learning and development professional is 1/3 wannabe college professor, 1/3 bad stand-up comedian, and 1/3 failed actor. So I think, that combination has been a way to kind of bring a lot of those different areas to bear. Because I do think we have kind of a unique place of being the function or the team that is kind of scanning what's out there as far as leadership theories, kind of latest thinking, kind of adult learning. So to really have a little bit of an eye to some of the latest research and cool creative ideas that you can kind of bring back into the workplace. I think one of the things we're challenged with is how do you take something that could be very kind of typical, especially if you've been in the workplace for a few years. You've probably been to all kinds of off-sites and team effectiveness training. So it's kind of how do you take something that could be very trite or very cliched, but always try to put a new or interesting spin on it. So I think that's really been an opportunity to try to challenge yourself creatively of how do you take something that people have probably done a million times and try to make it interesting and kind of capture their attention. So it offers a lot of opportunity to be creative and try different approaches to see what resonate with people.
That's great. And so are there a few things that you feel comfortable sharing, but where you've kind of built your own philosophies over the time? I mean, we've talked about teaming and things of that nature, but where you've been able to try things and then have it almost become institutionalized and see the results of those philosophies. But are there particular philosophies in building an L&D program that you've been employing at Banana Republic?
Yeah, a couple things jump to mind. I mean, one of it is this, I'm certainly not like the only person to think of this. It's definitely a hot topic, but how do we get more, I'd say, blended in our approach in all methods, both using technology, but also using kind of good old-fashioned bringing people together. So it's really something we've tried to push the envelope on as we look at programs or just interventions, as we work with different teams. So for a good example, where actually we've done a little bit of work with Inwoven is our onboarding experience, which again is one of those things that probably like I've done a million times, and people have an idea of probably what that's like. Like maybe I'm going to sit in a classroom and there's going to be some swag with the company logo, and they're going to talk about benefits, and some of those things still happen and are necessary. But I've really tried to, with what we call our brand immersion at Banana Republic, say how do we think a little bit differently about that. And so we've taken that day really out of a traditional kind of classroom type of setting. Other than, maybe the first 20 or 30 minutes, there's a little bit of time where people are sitting down in a meeting room. But really the rest of the time, we just take them on a walking tour of the building. And it's very, there's not a fireplace, but it's kind of that, trying to inject some of that spirit in a much bigger corporate environment and just kind of casually going floor by floor, meeting different teams. Sometimes we'll, as long as it's not too disruptive, maybe stick our heads in a meeting going on. And it's just been a way that to really kind of take something that could be a very boring and trite, like, onboarding again, and say, like, let's just make it very informal, very casual. Realize we're not going to like be able to cram every fact and figure someone needs to know, but we think we can give them a great experience, and they'll remember some of those moments and faces that they met through the experience. So that's one thing that stands out. And on a smaller scale, trying to do more of that whenever we can, to not just have someone packed in a classroom for 4 hours or 8 hours, but to find different ways to spread that learning out via both in person and where we can, via technology or digital tools.
Interesting. Now that makes a lot of sense. I mean, one of the things that is always tough is having people actually soak in that information. And we've talked a lot about that you give someone a sheet of just data points and they only remember a small percentage, but you give people stories, interactions, experiences with real people behind them, with real examples, and it starts to kind of come to life a little bit more. You were touching kind of on the tail end about technologies. Are there areas that you've seen, are there certain trends that you're seeing within technology, either replacing things you did or doing things better or improving? What are some of the things that you yourself are employing from a technology perspective?
Yeah, I think one of the ways we think about it is in ways very similar to the business we're in. You think about shopping, and a few years ago, right, that there was, well, actually not that long ago, this talk of the retail apocalypse, and that online shopping would completely eclipse retail, and that brick and mortar stores would be a thing of the past. And while certainly it's had a huge impact, the Amazons of the world, there's also been a resurgence of traditional retail. Those that do it well, obviously some have fallen by the wayside. So it's kind of a yes and approach, where definitely the online world has transformed the way people shop. They pre-shop, they hold things in their cart and then showroom it, go to check it out. But they both really coexist together. And the people that are winning are the ones that find a great way to blend both of those. So in a lot of ways, I think employee learning is kind of like that. A few years ago, e-learning was going to replace like all in-person interactions. But it can be a lot of that e-learning is bad, it's boring, and people still really gain a lot from the human interaction. So what we really tried to do is how do we have those things work in concert and augment each other. So rather it's still having an in-person experience, maybe it's shorter, maybe it's more, as you were saying, about the impactful moment than the information dump, but then finding ways via technology to reinforce it, to kind of remind people, to nudge people, to kind of remind them and prompt them. Microlearning is one of those buzzwordy things that people talk a lot about. And it's really just how do we serve up, bite-sized learning to people over time. It doesn't have to be just technology, it could be done other ways, but now that most of us, pretty much everyone, is walking around with a little computer in the palm of their hand, that really gives us a way and a medium to kind of deliver that learning or those nudges or those prompts to people in the moment. So I think really trying to blend them together and realize that they work in concert with each other when they work best.
Yeah, that's great. What role also do you play? It's a little off script, but I think a lot about culture. Right? We think a lot about how do you. There's one side which are here's the insights and experience you need to know, and then here's the culture, and obviously, throughout storytelling you're able to blend a couple of those things to represent culture. But how do you guys think about kind of culture at Banana Republic? Do you feel like, and I'm not going to put you on the spot, but do you feel like, is there a culture that you guys adhere to? And then how do you communicate that culture across employees? And does that fall in your realm at all, or does it fall in a different group?
Yeah, I think it's the way we think about it, it has to live outside of just the traditional HR L&D group, because then it's just kind of this centralized, not real thing. So we definitely play a part in it, but we have been thinking a lot more about how does everyone collectively own that. And we've really tried to, in the last 2 or 3 years, shift that culture. To be honest, we felt like we reached a point where we're probably a little stuffy, a little, sometimes taking ourselves a little too seriously. And for us, it was partially going back to our roots, even though now you probably think of Banana Republic as things like this, a lot of workwear. But the roots of the company really were, if anyone remembers that far back, kind of safari wear. So it has actually a really cool origin story that was very entrepreneurial, very much about travel and adventure. So we found it was how do we go back to and connect to what we were at the beginning, and remind ourselves that. So, it wasn't really new, but it was something we felt like we kind of forgot about ourselves and maybe started taking ourselves a little too seriously. So delving back into the history and connecting with that was an important part of it. And just some of the ways that we try to demonstrate it, both reflected and change the culture, was just by living it in our interactions. And onboarding is a good example. We had the opportunity, we moved our New York office to San Francisco last year, which enabled us to hire about a couple hundred people. So a good, probably a third of our corporate staff have all been hired in the last year. So it was a big opportunity to put a stamp on the culture. In the onboarding experience we talked about, we really tried to demonstrate and be very deliberate about being out on the floor, very visible. We have, it's a little ridiculous, but it's become kind of iconic, this giant sign on a stick. It looks like like you're on strike or something, picket sign, but it says onboarding in motion, come say hello. And so as we go around the floor, we're kind of holding the sign and, showing it to people in their meetings. And at first there's a lot of weird reactions, because this was not people are kind of at their desk or in their offices, and just to have this big group traipsing through and sometimes being a little disruptive, a little bit noisy. But I think in the last year, people have got used to that, and just trying to show people that, work doesn't have to be something that just happens quietly at your desk or in a meeting. It's, collaboration, it's teaming, as you said, happening out on the floor. So just sending some of those signals, not just in the content, but by the way in which we do things, we think kind of helps move the culture, but then also reflect back to people what it could be, what it could look like.
That's awesome. Wondering also how one thing that we're constantly trying to experiment with and understand better is make effective ways to almost crowdsource insights from employees? Like how can, the whole notion, we always, in a very personal way, we always talk about, we stand on the shoulders of our previous generations.
Yeah.
In some ways, those things could be applied to the workforce as well. There's someone who's either been in your position before or has encountered that situation before, who's opening up a store in an area that, that could love, some of those insights from other like store managers who may have opened similar stores. How do you think about capturing insights and experiences from employees right now, and then using that as like a growing base of information to distribute to employees?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I think we don't do enough of it or think about it as much as we should. There's a couple areas we do a pretty good job of capturing that knowledge. And I'd say it's more in the tangible, like the product that we've made. So we have an archivist, we have a great kind of on-site little, not a full-blown museum, but a nice little archive where all of the great marketing images you think through the years, having iconic brands like Gap and Banana Republic and Old Navy. You've probably seen many of them over the years. There's a lot of great photography, imagery, great product. We have archives of actually materials. So I think we do a pretty good job of cataloging that and giving people access for inspiration. But if you think about the other part that you're talking about, all of the great learning maybe around that, the storytelling, the mistakes that people made along the way, we really don't do a fantastic job of cataloging that and saving it for posterity. Sometimes there's that, oh wow, someone's retiring or leaving the company after 20 years, like everything's on their hard drive and it's like going with them. Like, how do we get our hands on that? So yeah, it's, here and there, it's done, but really nothing systematic. I think it's definitely kind of something that we're missing out on, by not capturing.
Let's continue to collaborate and figure out how
we
do that. When you think about like your job, and there's those heartwarming moments when you're like, okay, I did something, like this worked, it was successful, it's made an impact on someone's career, their development, their talent. Are there one or two examples of that for you where you feel like talent management has played a role and made an impact for someone, and you've had that kind of warm, fuzzy feeling? It's one of the things I love about this line of work, because I feel like we do get quite a few of those moments. And they're not always, earth-shattering, like you helped me realize my life's ambition and career. Sometimes they are smaller, but, a couple things that always stand out to me that give me kind of a sense of pride of ownership, or that's kind of exciting, is there's a lot of, you can say kind of collateral materials that might be created in the course of this, rather it's for a conference, a workshop, and especially when I used to work with the stores, it's kind of a big audience from all over the world. We'd pull them together for big conferences. And so it's always like a fun experience, and like visiting stores, and you go into a back room and you see on a bulletin board like, hey, I remember like designing that handout, or that tip sheet, or those little kind of moments where you see something posted up. And so it's very kind of cool to see that. Now, I mean, hopefully it's not collecting dust there, but it's kind of still alive and there, and hopefully from time to time someone glances at it and it's like, oh yeah, remember these are the, whatever it is, 7 habits, 5 steps that will help me do that. And then some are more personal, the stories that you hear, someone maybe coming up to you, and it's kind of cool. Sometimes I'm like, in this role, you're in front of a lot of people, so you may not always remember each individual, and having someone come, I don't know if you remember, but you led this meeting, you facilitated this class a couple years ago, and that made such a big impact on my leadership style, or I really took something away from it. And while it's cool when you like really, it's someone and work closely with, but I also really like just that emotion of like, wow, I didn't even, remember that, just because, maybe there was like 100 people in that. But yeah, it's very gratifying
to know like, okay, maybe people are listening, at least to like some parts of it. So yeah, and I think that those are like little moments that you see and feel that like there's an impact being made, or something's like living on beyond just the moment that it first happened.
That's great. And just curious for those who, a little off script too, but let's say there's somebody who's starting an L&D program at a company, like a growing company. Recently had a friend who was at Sony in L&D. Now he's starting the L&D at Casper, for instance, right? But let's say there's a growing company. I have a friend who runs Parachute, for instance. As they're growing, eventually they'll need an L&D because they're opening up brick and mortar stores and other things like that. What advice would you give to that, person who's, building an L&D and talent management department? Like, what are some of the things you'd imagine that they should kind of initially get started and do that? What insider advice would you give that person?
Yeah, great question. I mean, a couple things jump out at me. I think, this is a little more individual to the person, but I think just being a big learner yourself is, I think it's important to anybody, today in this kind of information-soaked world we live in. But especially, right, if you're tasked with kind of driving the learning of your organization, I think you really have to be a learner yourself. And that could be in a lot of different ways. Actually, I think the more diverse areas of interest and things you're delving into, the better, to kind of find some of those unusual connections. So I think that, is really first and foremost. And then kind of understanding the culture and the people at your organization. I mean, there certainly are some principles of adult learning that, are universal, but, companies really do have unique cultures, different preferences. So trying to get a pulse check on that is really important. So you're delivering something that is meeting people's needs is kind of key. And I think also not being afraid to experiment, not like we talked about the importance of standing on the shoulders of others. So, definitely would not dismiss networking and learning what else has happened. But in particularly, like if it's a growing company, maybe it's a new endeavor, like being able to chart your own course, knowing about some of what's out there. But the thing with, when you're only doing best practices, that's great, but you're also kind of copying what everyone else is doing. So not being afraid to maybe solve a new problem, try something that hasn't been done before. So I think we try to do some of that, but it could be a little more challenging in a really big organization. So I think like why I love staying in touch with you guys and to kind of see some of those growing organizations out there and what types of things are they trying and piloting can be really, really amazing. So
I was going to ask you about that. You're always something. I remember when I first met you, I think it was Darren who put us in touch, and he's like, you got to meet Dan because he's never afraid to try new things and think about new things. What has given you, is that a personal resolve? Is that because the organization has allowed you to do that? What has driven you to always kind of constantly be on the cusp of trying new technologies to make your...
Yeah, you're going deep, Niles. It's like, what makes
what's
you...
What's behind it, Dan? There's a childhood experience where you were there.
Yeah. I think, I think it's a little bit of both. I do think it's some is just kind of a personal thing. I always do, I have a lot of curiosity, and I'm just kind of interested in something new, something different, kind of going after that. But where I'd give a lot of credit to the organization too is, you don't always find, especially a big company, that is pretty supportive of that. So I think, that I found, especially in the last couple of years, a lot of support. And frankly, the sometimes failing can lead to trying new things. Because Banana Republic had a couple of really tough years business-wise. So I think you also, leadership and new leadership who came in are clearly what we've been doing is not working so great for us. So let's try something different. And so that openness, I think, really, kind of gave me the freedom to feel like we could try and pilot and do different things and see what works. And just to be a lot more iterative, not just build some giant program behind the scenes for 12 months and then have a big ta-da moment, but kind of, try it, test it, do it on a small scale, iterate, and then, take what works and keep scaling it. So yeah, probably a little bit of just personal, like what I like, but then also a lot of credit to being part of a team and an organization that's given a lot of support and freedom to do that.
That's great. And I guess one of my last questions would be, if for companies like, let's say our size, or companies that are under 50 people or something like that, that want to think about talent management, but don't necessarily have the resources to have an actual person on talent management, are there certain things we can do as small companies to at least take from some of the learnings? And I know we did a little bit of the teaming exercise, so I'm leading a little bit to that, and that was really, really helpful. But what advice would you give to, we're in the land of startups, right? Where there's a lot of smaller companies, and it could be argued is just as, if not more important, to like really be thinking about talent management in a certain way.
Yeah, I mean, a couple things come to mind. I think some of you talked about, where are those kind of partnerships you can form, maybe cross sector, or in our case, like someone you're kind of an exchange of ideas. Could be a really cool way of doing it. I know something I try to encourage internally, being part of a big company and people looking for career growth, is rather it's nonprofits or maybe, a company like Woven, like you don't always have the space maybe to play in a big company, but where are some interesting engagements like that? You could branch out with a nonprofit organization, a community organization, a startup to, find a way to partner your skills. So I think like that's an interesting. It doesn't happen always naturally, so you kind of have to
new
seek
idea.
it out.
We got to start connecting big company talent management with startups and nonprofits.
And then maybe internally finding like almost like, to go all the way back to your first question, how I got into this, I just like, my undergrad degree was business. I was like a supervisor, but I just found like, I liked people and started like, maybe I'll do a newsletter for my team. Maybe I'll coach them. So, and I think what I benefited from is a lot of people who took a risk on me at a time where I really didn't start with like a formal academic background or training in this type of role. But it was something I was passionate about and had leaders who saw it in me and encouraged it. And sometimes, they weren't the expert themselves, but they could find mentors for me or other people to connect me with. So maybe watch, it's a small company where you don't have an HR function per se, but, who are people that maybe have a passion or interest for that within the organization that might want to do a little bit more of that. And support that.
Great, that's great. I wanted to open it up to the team. Any questions for Dan, Mark?
Yeah, definitely. It seems like you're at the intersection of a lot of different departments, like inside of a company. I'm curious, what other departments do you work with closely, or more like most frequently? Is it brand, HR, internal comms? I can see you, being involved with all those departments.
Yeah, so I think, yes, as you said, probably like the closest partnership would be like our human resources team, which we're part of, but, a little bit different sector. Communications, for sure. A lot of the work we've done around the onboarding has put us into a lot of work with our recruiting team as well. And interesting enough, like I've always I've gone out of my way to try to stay close to the marketing team, because it might not seem like the most natural connection, but in many ways I feel like we're trying to do the same thing, capture people's attention, get people to do something, rather it's buy something, like lead differently. So that's been something I've always tried to stay close to and learn from our marketing team. Like we've had, as we send out communication, if I could get someone's marketing brain to look at it, is this going to capture people's interest? Is there a better way, we could package this, tell our own story internally? So that is a team that's probably not always a natural connection, but I've always tried to stay close to, because I think there's a lot we can learn from each other as we're trying to really influence and move people's behaviors.
That's great.
That's interesting.
Other questions?
In terms of your role, I'm curious if there's anything in terms of like approaching an old problem in a new way, or a book, or like a blog that you've gotten really excited about recently.
There's a book. It's a couple years old, but it's by a woman named Liz Wiseman. She's kind of one of these leadership gurus. And she's probably most well known for a book called Multipliers, which also is a really good book. But I like one she wrote called, I might have it exactly right, I think it's Rookie Mindset. But it's really this notion of, right, how do you kind of, when you've done something for a long time, take what she calls like this rookie mindset. And we have sometimes this notion that expertise always leads to better performance. And she has a lot of interesting examples where actually sometimes that gets in the way of performance. And we can find times where someone who's new at something is approaching in a very novel way. Can actually have really good performance. That one comes to mind as like an interesting one. And this is a little bit, what was your term, off script? So a little off script, but something just I kind of did for myself, but I'm finding a lot of personal implications is the last year or so I've been doing improv training. And I just find, it's kind of this crazy art form where you're, trying to be funny or whatever and making things up on the fly. But it just the way that it like forces your mind to think quickly, look for different connections. I've kind of been surprised by how many connections back to the work that we do. So I just, and it doesn't have to be that, but I just think that kind of multidisciplinary thing of, I don't know what it is, martial arts, improv, knitting, like doing something very different than what you do every day at work, and then kind of finding how you might connect them can be really helpful.
Are we gonna see you anywhere in improv? Like, are you on stage?
No, just our class presentations right now. So yeah.
You gotta join a group. There was that great. What was that great movie with David Bariglia and like, I can't remember. There was an awesome improv movie. Jordan, or I think Key was in it too. Anyways, I'll find it. I'll find it and send it to you. Had 99% on Rotten Tomatoes. So
yeah, okay.
worth watching.
Yes, there's crowdsourcing.
Any other questions or thoughts? Or Mark.
I have another one.
Oh wait, does he get to ask too? Is that?
Yeah. Greg ceded his question to Mark.
I'm super curious. I think the relationship between like a corporate headquarters and like for a retail brand and like the people who are actually in the stores is super interesting. Where does L&D sit in terms of making sure that people who work at a retail location feel like they're part of the company and not just like I don't know, just like out there kind of floating, like a satellite and more connected.
Yeah, because you think about, I went to a Banana Republic in like Livermore, for instance, right?
Yeah.
And like, how does that person feel? It's actually not that far from headquarters, but I guess they probably don't get that much kind of like, how do they feel a part of?
That's one of the most challenging, aspects of this, because I think we have, I forget the exact number, somewhere in the neighborhood of like 20,000 employees total Banana Republic, but the vast majority of those, I don't know, probably 98% are associates, in the stores. Many of them are part-time. So you have, not all of them, but a lot of them maybe are like they're, even like could be 18 years old, college kids, working a few hours a week. And how do you kind of get someone like that interested in the brand or the key messages that may only be in the store for a few hours. So a lot of it is, I think, how do we really capture the attention of the people that lead those stores, the district manager and the general manager. Those are really like the primary people that communicate to them. And then it's just a big exercise, and there are some areas where you want to be, I think, very like open and like there's no wrong answers, but when you get that big. You certainly want people to be creative, but you do also have to really think in like an execution mode. So you imagine the old like telephone game, now imagine that like spread across the world with 20,000 people and how far you can get. So trying to be a little bit more prescriptive, and some of that messaging can be really important. It is one area where we're just now starting to solve it, is we think technology could help, to deliver some more consistent messages, because a lot of the training honestly still is like print out some stuff and get in a back room, because there's just a whole host of technology challenges of, the malls we're in, the company's been around a long time, a lot of legacy systems. So you'd think like it all happens on like an iPad, and but it's like not that way. We're starting to move in that direction of like, how can we get more consistent like training at people's fingertips when they need it. So there's not, I guess the answer is there's not an easy answer to it. But I think, really like, it's when you start to bite it off, like, okay, there's 20,000 people, but there's only so many district managers, and there's still a lot of store managers, but a more manageable number that we bring together a couple times a year to try to educate them and get them excited.
Totally. Yeah, I bring that up because our last fireside chat with Arthur from Avis, he has to get, I think it's 30,000 people in the field up to speed on like a new technology they're bringing like to their fleets. So yeah, I'm just so curious about bringing that to people.
And it's so relevant. I mean, in this world of social media, right? It takes whatever it could be. One kind of bad incident in a store, can spread like wildfire, and even though that may be very isolated, and there's training to try to like teach people not to do that. But yeah, if you don't get that many impressions, something could take off. And for a lot of people, that's like top of their mind when they think about a brand. So yeah, it's definitely, it's always important, one, just to do the right thing, but two, just realizing like how easily like a narrative can like get away from you, in this world.
Totally. That's great. Anyone else? Yep.
So when you're trying to combine more traditional learning and development techniques with newer technology or software, like what kind of qualities do you look for? What's some criteria that you have?
Yeah. So one of the things. So this is good. So I was going to bring it up earlier, but it didn't come up. So I'm glad you asked. Yeah. We're
Planted
faced
that
with
one? No,
yes, yeah. But it is like, well, there's two things. There's one, you can look at something really like cool and innovative, and finding in woven that just like, wow, this really meets a need we're looking at. But that's really only part of the battle, especially being part of a big company that's been around a long time, because then there's how does it play with all of our other systems, an IT department, how does it fit into their roadmap, then the whole, if it's, in our world, a lot of it sits in kind of the HR technology, and, does it talk to and work with whatever it is, Workday or PeopleSoft. So those are, two interesting challenges that we are faced with. I think part of it is just on, which a lot of people probably in L&D or talent management may not be well versed in technology, so it's seeking out, who are your HR technology partners, like half of it just knowing the right people and getting the right people connected from security and all of those elements, which might be, it's not probably core competency. So, but it's like finding who are the people in your organization that you need to connect with to make sure that this is at least feasible, and they can kind of play nicely together. Because it's great to find something, but then if it doesn't fit into if you're part of a big organization, the technology roadmap, it could either be not a great investment or not really get the traction that you're looking for.